introducing the man you've all been waiting for, Secretary Kennedy.
Thank you all very much for being here, and I want to thank Liam, who runs all my social media and has done an incredible job in making us the leading social media, and I don't know what we call it, but influencer or whatever. We're doing well, and I made an observation in the campaign because traditional media, which I grew up with, is dead in this country. It's just propaganda vessels for large corporations, corporate interests, and for orthodoxies, for instead of speaking truth to power, they become the Praetorian Guard for the powerful and for oppressing and suppressing and censoring the voices of dissidents. It was the opposite of what media was supposed to do in a democracy, but it actually did do when I was a kid, but it no longer serves that function. And I made the observation when I was running, because I was completely censored since 2005 in this country, in the mainstream media. I had been a darling of the media before that, but after 2005, I couldn't even get an op-ed printed. People would attack me by name, and there was usually a right to reply if you got attacked by name, but I couldn't even get a letter to the editor. And I'm not complaining, I'm just talking about a reality that all of us recognize. But there have been a series of presidents in this country that have become president because they were able to adopt quickly the new forms of media. Franklin Roosevelt became president who was in a wheelchair, and nobody knew it because he became the master of radio. And he was talking to, giving fireside talk chats to the American public, which the entire public began to rely on. And radio made him president. And then my uncle, John Kennedy, had a special knack for television at a time when television was just taking off. And he was the first presidential debates. And he did well in those debates because of his appearance on television. A lot of people say that he resoundingly won his debates with Nixon. Nixon was very smart and was a good debater. People who listened to it on the radio generally found that there was a tie. People who saw it on television resoundingly felt my uncle had won because he had an ability to communicate with TV. President Trump in 2016 became president because he became a master of Twitter. It was a new media source that was out there. And the traction that I got as presidential candidate came largely because of podcasts. Because those were I was good at long form interviews. And those were and it was really a brand new media source at that time, but I was able to reach a large part of the American people. Ironically, the people most opposed to me were the baby boom generation, and was watching CNN and was watching the network news, and they're the ones who loved the Kennedys, and I should have done really well with that cohort. But I did abysmally with them. I was beating President Trump and President Biden in Americans under 49 years old. I asked my kids once, I asked my son Connor, have you ever watched an evening news on television? He said, no, never. His whole life, never watched. Well, that's a generation that's getting their news from you guys, and it was, I'm in this post because of the support I got from social media and from podcasts. Not even the support, it's just the hearing, because it was journalism. They were people who were giving me a platform, so I'm very grateful to your entire industry. Let me put it that way. But for those of you who don't know about my background, I was an environmental lawyer for 40 years, and I ran a group I started a group that was, I went to work for a group of commercial fishermen on the Hudson. They had a patrol boat, and they were suing polluters, and I began suing polluters. I brought over 500 cases, and forced polluters spent about $5.2 billion, and the Hudson went from being dead for 20-mile stretches north of New York City, south of Albany, zero dissolved oxygen. The water caught on fire. It turned colors depending on what color they were painting the trucks at the GM plant in Tarrytown. And today it's the richest waterway in the North Atlantic. It produces more pounds of fish per acre, or more biomass per gallon than any other waterway in the Atlantic Ocean. And the success that we had on the Hudson spread to other river systems, and we had licensing river keepers on all these other systems. We actually had 350 river keepers on almost all the big American rivers. And I was representing all of them in lawsuits. A lot of them had their own attorneys, but we were doing a lot of sort of communal lawsuits. And in 2003, FDA and the National Academy of Sciences published a report that said that every freshwater fish in America had dangerous levels of mercury in its flesh. And 1 out of every 6 American women had high enough levels in their umbilical cords to cause permanent brain damage in children. And so they did a study that showed that every freshwater fish in America had dangerous levels of mercury in its flesh. We started suing cement kilns and coal-burning power plants, which are the primary source of mercury. And at one point, I had about 40 cases in various states in the province of Canada. And these women started showing up at every talk that I gave. I was speaking around the country at that point. And they would sit in the front row, and they would come early, and they would stay late and ask to talk to me afterward. And I talked to them. And as it turns out, they were all the mothers of intellectually damaged children. They believed that mercury in vaccines had destroyed their children's brains and caused those injuries, and nobody was listening to them. At that point, in my party, everybody was saying we should start listening to women. And I listened to them, and then they showed me some science. One of them came to my house, and I found my house on Cape Cod in the summer of 2005, and she came to, I didn't know her, she was a psychologist from Minnesota named Sarah Bridges. Her son had gotten autism from a vaccine, and then won a case at vaccine court, a $20 million judgment. She didn't want to have other kids, and she came to my home with 18 inches of scientific studies. And she put them on my front porch, and then rang my doorbell. And when I answered the door, she said, "I'm not leaving here to read these." And I had an appointment. I said, "I'll be back in a couple of hours." I came back, and I started reading the studies. I feel comfortable reading science. All of my cases have involved scientific controversies, and part of my job is deconstructing science. For us, doing destructive cross-examinations of industry scientists. And so I'm comfortable reading it. And before I was 4 or 5 inches down on that pile, I was reading the abstracts. I saw that there was this huge delta between what the public health agencies were saying about vaccine safety and what the actual peer-reviewed science was saying. And that, took me down a rabbit hole that really destroyed my career, my relationships. It ended my relationships with the environmental groups that I had started. And I was silenced largely. But I saw then, that it wasn't just these kids who had autism. The autism rates had gone from 1 in 10,000 in 1970 to, at that time, it was like 1 in 100. Today it's 1 in every 31 kids. And I was seeing these explosion of kids. I knew not only that I had autism, but all this other damage, these autoimmune diseases and neurological diseases and allergies. And I had a son who was allergic to almost everything. And I did over 20 emergency room visits with him before he was 2 years old. And a lot of times he almost died. And he'd go to a birthday party and take a birthday cake, and there was peanuts in it. You know, there was somebody who cooked the cake in the same pan that they had cooked peanuts in. And he'd go to the emergency room. And I started seeing these kids everywhere. And I have 7 kids, and I had 11 brothers and sisters. I had 70 first cousins. None of them had allergies like that. And all 7 of my kids, or 6 of my 7 kids, all of them had allergies. And I was like, what is happening? Something is happening to these children. And that nobody is talking about it. The pediatricians are pretending it's not happening. You know, the teachers who are seeing this generation of damaged kids are saying it's not happening. And I saw it and I couldn't think about anything else but, you know, what is happening to all of these children? And for 20 years, I got on my knees every morning and prayed that God would put me in a position to be able to end this pandemic, this chronic disease pandemic. And in August of 2024, he sent me Donald Trump. And, you know, President Trump, in the previous June, had put out a tweet that I could have written, and it was about chronic disease, and about bad food, and pharmaceutical interventions that were killing our kids. And then we found that common ground. We found a lot of other areas of common ground, but now it was the place, that was the beachhead. And he said, I want you to, let's merge our campaigns. And if we win, you know, I will turn you loose on this. And so that's how I ended up here. But, you know, the real malpractice happening in the media. Nobody is talking about this. Even today, nobody is acknowledging it. You know, they're still portraying, you know, everything that we're doing as insanity. We all saw it during COVID, what they do. We saw the whole American public began to realize that the government lies to them. My father told me when I was a kid, people in authority lie. And, you know, that is a critical assumption that we all have to have in democracy. We all have to maintain a fear skepticism towards authority. Because people in power lie, and the scientific establishment lies again and again and again and again. And there's so many of these orthodoxies and these scientific consensus that have coalesced around bad science, fake science. And we see it in food, we see it in medicines, we see it in vaccines. But you know, my biggest hope for this country is you guys, is that we now have an independent media that actually is willing to confront these issues and to speak truth to power and to give a bullhorn to dissent and to actually be an instrument of change in this country. We have a generational opportunity now with these dietary guidelines to change the food culture in our country. But it's critical that we get the message out of the I want to thank all of you. We're here. We're going to do everything we can to give you good information. Our job is not to force people to do things. Our job is to make everybody, like I said downstairs, the CEO of their own health. And our job, our part of that is to give them good information. And we need that information broadcast around the country so that Americans actually have access to it. So I'm hoping that all of you will understand the importance of getting this message out, of exploring the truth, and you shouldn't believe anything I say. You should express skepticism toward everything. We all have the ability to think critically and to all of our job, and particularly in journalism, it's a search for existential truths. Whether you're an artist, a lawyer, a journalist, that's what we should be doing. And we are going to try to do the best that we can to make sure that what we say comes from real science, that we say when we tell people when we don't know something. We're not going to pretend, we're not going to tell people noble lies. Like Anthony Fauci did, on masks, on social distancing, on transmission, on natural immunity, all the things they lied to us about. We're not going to do that. We're going to tell people when we know things, when we don't know things, and give people the truth so they can make genuine, informed choices and make good choices for their health, for their children, for our country. I want to thank you all for your help with that.
Okay, now we're going to do photos. If everyone could start making a line behind the rope stanchion there.
Okay.
Very nice to meet you.
It was lovely
Take care.
meeting you.
And if
Happy
everyone,
New Year.
it's your turn to take a photo, take